In Northeast, as you know, the common, especially the foresters commons, play a very significant role in people's lives and a subsistence. And the Jum cultivation is one of the such commons which shared and manage community collectively in the region, and it has a very close relationship with the people's economic, social, and political life. Let me give it a small, very brief context of the shifting cultivation in the region. Shifting cultivation, commonly also known as the Jhum cultivation in Northeast India, and is considered as one of the oldest form of agriculture practices which evolved over ages, where the local community clear a piece of forest, burnt, and grow the diverse food crops to meet their livelihood needs. Zoom still being still as a dominant economic activity, where more than 86% of the local community still depend on the Zoom cultivation for their livelihood and subsistence. Is a very complex systems and also a self-sufficient system with no external input required except manual labors, and it has been adequately meeting the various needs of the local communities, which include the food, fibers, energy and other need of the local communities. In Nagaland alone, we have seen every year more than 1 lakh forests are bought under for the Jum cultivations. In terms of food diversity, Jum cultivation one of the major reservoir for agrobiodiversity, and the various studies shows that in one particular Jum plot, the community grow more than 70 varieties of food crops. Jum cultivation is also a very classic examples and how local community are interacting with the natures and harnessing the nature for their livelihoods and also sustainably managing the resources. Therefore, Jum is not only a merely a form of cultivation practices, but it's also a way of life since the Jum is very closely associated with the local communities, culture, traditions, festivals, and histories. Despite its contribution in the people life, Jum has been continuously targeted and attract criticism being a threat to biodiversity loss and the climate change. But many fact and evidence shows it hold a promising prospect of climate change mitigations and adaptation while ensuring the food security in the region. In order to understand this complexity of Zoom's cultivations and debunk some of the myth that are associated with the Zooms, today we have invited two most prominent experts from the Northeast region who devoted their time and energy in understanding the dynamic of the Zoom cultivations in the Northeast region. So they'll be talking very extensively on the Zoom cultivation that has been practiced by the local community in the Northeast region. Moving ahead, let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Amba Jamir. He is a policy analyst and development advisor, having more than 2 decades of multidisciplinary and multi-team experience from policy formulation to project development, implementation, and reviews. Dr. Jamir is professionally trained as an environmental lawyer and development communicator. He is a grassroots convener, trainer, and facilitator with vast experiences in the field of education, rural development, community institutions, natural resource management, livelihood, and policy advocacy. Dr. Jamir worked directly with the policy makers, NGOs, the community leaders, farmers, the poorest of the poor in the mountain region, particularly Eastern Himalayas. He has extensively worked with the local, national, and international NGOs, the governments, and with the advanced regional policy and research think tank. He is also a founding member of Sustainable Development Forum, Nagaland, and the Integrated Mountain Initiatives. Today, he'll be sharing the knowledge and experiences as how Zoom cultivation are interlinked with the people life in securing community livelihoods, maintaining agrobiodiversity is cool, ensuring the food security, sovereignty, and he also touch upon the various policy that associate with the Jum cultivation in the region. With this note, I like to welcome Dr. Ambajamir Shah. and also thanking him for accepting our invitation to be a part of this webinar. Now I'll give time to Ambazimi sir to deliver his talk and also share his experiences working in Zoom cultivation in the Northeast region. So over to you, sir, now.
Thank you very much, and hello, friends. Guaranteed that was a really big introduction. So, first of all, I'm a compounder, not a doctor. So, having said that, let me share my PowerPoint with you all. Is it showing? Is it visible?
Visible, sir. Just make it a PowerPoint form.
Yeah, slideshow. So, so basically, thank you very much. How much time do I have?
You have around 30 minutes so that you can have
Okay,
more
I'll try to
time
do
for
it
the
within 20,
question.
20
Yeah.
minutes if possible. And so basically, I am presuming that shifting cultivation is something which all participants here are aware of, and therefore will not really get into the dynamics of what is shifting cultivation. But just to sort of rejig our minds and to remind ourselves, um, if you look at the system of shifting cultivation, Uh, there are two main thoughts that are there behind it. One says that it is sustainable, the other says it is not sustainable. And therefore, while neither of them is wrong, but it would be wrong to say that it is a form of cultivation which is not good and should be done away with. It simply put, if you are to judge whether a shifting cultivation is good or bad, what I normally tell people is keep in mind a few points. A few points like, does it have a fallow cycle that is sustainable, at least 10 years and above? Does it have a cropping system that is multiple, uses heritage seeds, and promotes agrobiodiversity? If it does, then I think it is sustainable. Does it have good soil and water conservation measures? If that is not being done, then even if you have a good fallow cycle, it is very important that soil and water conservation measures are done on the field, because shifting cultivation is a rain-fed agroforestry system, and therefore it is very important that this component is strong. Also, does it have a good fire control mechanism? Across mountains, we see a lot of wildfire forest fires. All the forest fires in the mountains are not because of shifting cultivation, although many people like to blame shifting cultivation for all the fires that happen in the mountains. A lot happens because of many other reasons, but there has to be a institutionalized fire control mechanism that is happening. What about the institutional mechanisms that is controlling and managing shifting cultivation? How are communities involved? How are community institutions involved? We need to look into that. We also need to look into the fallow management practice. Do they have good fallow management practices? If all the above are existent and if they are being done, then I think the system by itself is sustainable. In case of communities who don't have enough land, they may not have a long fallow cycle, but if they're incorporating some of the other components, it can be made sustainable. And therefore, I think let's move away from the very either black or white point of view of saying it is good or it is bad, but we need to keep in mind these factors. And that's why very quickly I'm putting this forward. The other thing is, no matter what people may say, shifting cultivation continues to be and is a key food production system. A food production system that is happening not only on the cropping phase of the June fields, but also from the forestry mechanism. And that is something that we need to really, really keep in mind. The other thing is, shifting cultivation is not just a food production system alone, it is a principal land and resource management system that communities have been using and continue to use. And that factor must always be kept in mind when we remember and talk about shifting cultivation. The third thing is, there are so many institutions that are linked around this shifting cultivation. Not only institutions, but there is a lot of other knowledge base, cultural, and so many other things happening around this system, and we cannot delink them from the practice that is there. And more importantly, in today's world, when we talk about climate change, I think this is one of the best climate resilience or smart agriculture systems that can be taught about. How that goes about, we need to really dig a little deeper. Now, as I said earlier, whether it is from the cropping phase or from the fallow phase, communities continue to get food around the season, around the year from these different areas. A lot of change is also happening in shifting cultivation areas. It is not just that the farmers are just stuck in a museum like situation where they're just doing what they've been doing forever. There are changes happening, changes in cropping systems, changes in bringing in shade loving crops like cardamom. In some shifting cultivation fallow areas, farmers are also trying to bring in tea-based agroforestry systems. So there is a lot of changes happening. There's a lot of issues related to forestry issues, a lot of issues related to community lands and how it is managed. So when you look at shifting cultivation, we need to look at it from a landscape perspective and not only look at what a farmer is doing in his zero point 0.5 hectare of land. Now let's try and get a little bigger picture of it. If you look at the livelihood assets of shifting cultivators, and if you look at it from a very development focused perspective, uh, here we have the five capitals which any development student will probably know: the human capital, natural capital, financial capital, physical capital, and the social capital. And I would like to take you through each one of this and link it to shifting cultivation and see how shifting cultivators actually manage not just their farming mechanism, but also in terms of all these other capitals, which is very critical for any individual, society, or community to prosper and coexist. In terms of the human capital, if you look at it, this is a practice which has been built upon generations. The amount of knowledge systems that exist within the system is tremendous. How much of it do we know? How much of it do we not know? How much of this is actually going away? And this knowledge system is linked not only to the food and crops they produce, but it is linked to so many other things, including climate predictions, seasonal predictions, seed management, and so many other things. And these are the skills that come out of the knowledge management that they have is tremendous. The capacity to work in such environments, the capacity to adapt to the changing climatic and development scenarios, and the power of resilience that communities have. I think these are issues that we really must keep in mind as we discuss shifting cultivation. Let's not for once be focused only on the cutting of forests and the burning of forests and so on and so forth. Let's look at the other aspects which a lot of people tend not to talk about. The natural capital cultivators, the land that they have in terms of forest. A lot of foresters might say shifting cultivators are destroying forest. They're cutting down forests and they're burning it, and they're the biggest destroyers. But if you look at the Forest Survey of India map and look at where shifting cultivation exists and compare this to, you will notice that forests exist where shifting cultivation exists. In other words, for shifting cultivators, they must have forests, and it is in their interest to maintain forests as best as they can, because only then can they continue the practice of shifting cultivation. In terms of rivers and springs, in many of these places that they don't even go into those areas uh, to do their shifting cultivation practices, and therefore the way they nurture these areas in terms of wild foods and fibers and other non-cultivated crops that they get from the different fallow areas, I think it is tremendous. Agrobiodiversity is an issue that is big. I have a slide on this. I will talk about it later on. And of course, the environmental services, which the way that they look at the landscape, the way that they manage the landscape, it's not only about managing the cropping phase of their shifting cultivation of a particular year, but in terms of how they go beyond looking at just the cropped area and going beyond. I think that is something where, in terms of the natural capital that these communities and these farmers manage, it's really amazing. Uh, the social capital, again, this is a system which is, and very rightly so, we are discussing this in the Commons Week of 2020. This is a system that has built upon itself in terms of common property regimes, where communities have got together to manage it. In my own tribe, for example, I may own a plot of land, but when it comes to shift and cultivation, it is the community that decides where to shift, where to do the cultivation, when to cut the forest, when to set it on fire, and a lot of other activities are involved in it. And therefore, the community responsibility, the kinship of ways of doing things, issues of access and benefit sharing, even if somebody does not have land, he or she can still continue doing shifting cultivation within the community areas. And that is why many shifting cultivation areas do not have people who are called landless, if you may say so. And the value systems that they encourage, the social safety mechanisms that are incorporated in these. I mean, these are all issues, these are the capitals that we must look into. This is beyond just economic capital we're talking about. And these are the value systems that ensure that such a system exists. And such a system exists not only in terms of keeping alive what they do, but it is a global heritage when you look at knowledge. It is a global heritage when you look at seed production systems, the heritage seeds that they have, and so many other things that exist. And this is another factor which I really wanted to highlight as we get into a little deeper into shifting cultivation. The third one is the physical capital, which is basically, see, shifting cultivation may not use the best of industrial and mechanized tools and technologies, but farmers have tools and technology that they have been using and improving over the years. How many of that have we actually looked into? How many of these do researchers understand? How are we even trying to introduce to them new things without even realizing that they have so many other technologies, whether it's in terms of seed collection and seed storage, the way the woman maintained the seeds over years, keeping alive such genetic resources, the way farmers are actually experimenting and breeding 2 3 different types of seeds, or even domesticating wild species and making them commercially viable, the way the pest management is done, the way soil water and nutrition management is done. I think the way they do all this and the infrastructures that they have, this is another type of capital which unfortunately don't get talked about when shifting cultivation is discussed. And I think this is something which is again very important as we think about shifting cultivation. Unfortunately, capital is the weakest link for shifting cultivators. And this is often because of the tenure system. The tenure system that the communities have is community-based tenure system, which unfortunately is not recognized by modern financial institutions to give loans and other subsidies and schemes. And therefore, we have a community or people that is very rich in resources, but a cash poor. And because of that, and many a times they cannot do things that they want to do. They cannot improvise on things that they continue to be doing so many ways, in so many different ways and manners. And this has had a very negative impact in the way they do. In terms of savings and pensions, again, they have to just depend on what they get from the fields and from the fallows, wages and remittance. It's not happening like it would be happening with other land use systems. And this, I think, is the weakest link that we can think of. Having said that, if you look at shifting cultivation from the issue of food sovereignty, where communities and peoples have the right to grow and consume the foods that they like, grow and consume seeds and other fruits that they have, which they have at the disposal to use at different seasonalities. I think this is an issue that is very, very strong. Markets are opening up. Many schemes, central government programs are coming in, and many of them are pushing in crops that are not really, really food crops in terms of what the community may want to eat. but they are forced to grow them so that they can export it to other outside markets. We need to really think about, if we are talking about transformation of shifting cultivation, at whose cost are we going to be transforming it and for whom? The issue of agro biodiversity, I will not get into that now because I have a slide after this, and livelihood security. This, if it weren't for shifting cultivation, uh, thousands of communities across mountains in India and across the world who are dependent on rain-fed agro systems wouldn't be having a livelihood in terms of what they have today. If you look at the pictures, you can see the maximum, the way that they have maximized the area in terms of even the roof of a small hut in the field is used to produce food. So it's not only on the ground, even in the air above them, they maximize whatever they can maximize in terms of what they do. Now, if you look at this, these are two cases that I'm bringing up to you, and it may show 1998 and 1999, but believe you me, this is only existing and increasing because farmer consciousness has really come about. But can you think about any agricultural system across the world where you will have 167 types of crops in a farmer's kitty or field, which is less than a hectare? It's amazing. Or a community that has 12 varieties of rice that they continue to harvest over the years. Or a field, even after you have harvested your main crops, you still have about 18 residual crops that are existing. That is the diversity that we're talking about. That is the diversity that is going to ensure that communities like this coexist not only with themselves but survive the challenges of climate change, provides them the adaptation mechanisms, gives them the resilience strategies. So these are the issues that we must really keep in mind when we discuss shifting cultivation. Very quickly, if you look at it, whether it's millets, ginger, that mind you is from one village, the varieties of ginger that they have, the varieties of corns, the varieties of different seeds, or even at the brinjals or the yams and yarrows or the pumpkins. That is the diversity we're talking about. And this is something which throughout the season they get. At different seasons of the year, they get all these different types of food. Now, by trying to transform them, by trying to provide them an alternative, what are we ready to sacrifice all this? Are we wanting to do away with all this? For example, in my village, when you see, potato was never a traditional crop for us. Potato was something which was introduced to us by the governments. And when potato came in, we started losing out a lot of varieties of yam, because yam used to be the substitute that we used to use for potato. And not only the yam, but the recipes that were there, the yam recipes, a lot of the younger generation don't even remember having so many different recipes of yam that were there. And it is not just about the yam or the recipes, but when you lose a particular type of seeds, you lose so many other things together with it. You lose the knowledge that is associated with it in terms of managing it. You lose the practice that is associated with it in terms of producing it. You lose the language that you use when referring to this type of crops and its management. You lose the knowledge that is associated in a large, bigger manner, and we lose a whole lot of things that go along with it. And therefore, it's very important that we keep in mind these issues of agro-diversity, agro-biodiversity, when we really talk about shifting cultivation. Coming to the policy, having said all that, it's sometimes very frustrating, because for someone like me who has been looking at the policy scenario for the past 73 years or more, we have been independent. Till today, there is no policy that says support shifting cultivation or that says improve shifting cultivation. Whatever policy existed, whether it is schemes or programs, yes, there are policies that are designed to be implemented with shifting cultivators. But the hidden agenda behind these policies, or the agenda rather, not even hidden, is to eradicate shifting cultivation, or to wean them away, or to replace them, or to give them an alternative, or to rehabilitate the shifting cultivators. And such wrong narratives, and many of these wrong narratives, unfortunately, are not supported by evidences in terms of somebody might have done a study somewhere in a small area and they try to paint that study as a whitewash for all shifting cultivation systems across the region. And I think that is very wrong. And this is where we need to really, really ensure that we have good evidence, whether you were talking for it or whether you're talking against it. Let's base our arguments and debates on evidences that can be really looked into. There is also no true research or extension services being made available to shifting cultivators. And this is really, really frustrating for shifting cultivators. On one hand, we are telling them that they're primitive, but on the other hand, we are doing nothing to reach out to them. And I think we need to really ensure that good research, good technology intervention, all these inputs are provided to them. Fortunately, the global narrative on shifting cultivation is changing. The global narrative on shifting cultivation is coming to such that people have realized that small farming systems or family farming systems are climate smart farming systems. And these are the types of systems which are the real food producers. They are not those big sugarcane plantations or maize and wheat plantations that are there across the world, which is actually going to industries or to cattle farms. But these are farmers who are actually producing food with the smallest of climatic footprints and have the capacity to provide alternatives with regard to adaptation and resilience. And these are agencies that are, whether it's the UN agencies like IFAD and the FAO or the IDRC or even NITI Aayog, fortunately, has also have come up with a report that looks at shifting cultivation in a more understanding manner. And I think that's a good step forward that we are having at this point in time, that people have started listening to and talking about shifting cultivation in a more neutral and acceptable manner. Two breakthroughs that I would like to make about shifting cultivation related activities or development interventions are two projects, which is the NERCOM project supported by IFAD initially, and the NEPED project. NEPED happens to be one of the partners of this webinar. These are the two interventions which actually looked at shifting cultivation areas and looked at shifting cultivation people and did not come with an alternative per se, but they brought two options. One is they brought in the livelihood option and said, we need to work on your livelihood opportunities. We need to improve your livelihood options. And the other thing is the NEPED looked at it from a way where we said, people have the knowledge, people have the know-how. We have to build upon this knowledge to improve shifting cultivation if we ever have to improve it. Until and unless we build upon the knowledge that exists, it's pointless for us to try and dump new knowledge on them. And these two projects that way looked at shifting cultivators in such a way that they respected the traditions, the practices, the social context of the Jumias, and thereby, in a way, facilitated entrepreneurship and marketability of shifting cultivation producers. And they involve the traditional village institutions from the very beginning. And this, I think, are lovely models that we need to keep in mind, whether we're talking about development interventions or whether we're talking about policy changes. The strategic learning, if you really look at it, was they did not look into the issue of how can we bring a new change to them, but they look into what and how of these two domains of shifting cultivation. They did not try to change or pull, but they took the Jumias into confidence. And I think these are the issues that we really, really need to look at. They did not threaten the traditional land use and land management mechanisms that exist in the communities. And when I bring this word of jeopardizing or threatening land tenure and management norms, a lot of government interventions, for example, if you plant a tree in a land for me, but the land does not belong to me, I'm going to be sitting on the land for the next 30, 40 years, depending on what type of tree is there, because that tree is going to be growing there for that long a time. And and therefore, it can play a lot of issues in terms of how the community approaches access to land and tenure and other things like that. So this project sort of understood these mechanisms and ensured that activities were designed keeping this in mind. And of course, a lot of involvement of civil society and NGOs and unique project management teams were used. So basically, very quickly, I think I've taken about 20, 22 minutes. So thank you very much. I would rather have questions and answers, so I'm not going to spend too much time on presentation here. that's it from me. Thank you very much.